Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Blair Dobbins, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, I guess we should start with, I connected to you through your fiance.
That's right, Laura.
I say it that way. Yeah, Laura Perry. I say it that way because you guys, I don't know if dated's the right term, but you guys had been an item that makes you sound like 17-year-olds. You'd been dating quite some time, and then you kind of surprised her, right? Can you tell that story?
Yeah, we've been dating, so long I can't remember the exact amount of time, but I'd say about 16 years. And in January on her birthday, I proposed and surprised her. And it's really not that much of a story. It's just one of these things that we had been together for a long time, pretty much acted more than like most married couples would act, if that makes any sense. Bought a house together a couple years ago. And I don't know if you spend much time on the water, but sometimes if you're hanging out in the James and you're paddling along, you get stuck in an eddy where you're just there. You're not going upstream, you're not going downstream, you're just kind of there. And it might be a fine place to be. And I think it was. And I just realized that probably it would be a good idea to go one direction or the other. And I was thinking probably make her happy if we got engaged. Let's see if that'll work. So popped it out there. She was in the mood, and that's what happened. So
that had to be the surprise of her life.
I can't speak for her, but she was pretty surprised. It's one of these things. I'm one of these dumb guys that is like, I figure everybody else sees it coming, but I probably overthink things. So it takes me a little while to build up. By the time I pull the trigger on some stuff, people are shocked. But yeah, she was surprised. Yeah, it was not something she was expecting.
She would have to be. And yes, I am a water guy. I love spending time on the Rappahannock, the James, the Piankatank. Give me any river and I will gladly spend the rest of my life there. But I don't have that luxury. You actually kind of do. The house you guys bought together is right there on the James, right?
We got super lucky. Yeah, we're right in the James, right where the Wiley Bridge comes over. It's funny because when we talked to the person who was selling it at the time, she kept on emphasizing it's the only sandy beach on the James, which I'm like, but it's great because you literally walk down. We've got a couple 100 feet of sand before you get to the river. And we're right there, which is kind of great for the soul, particularly in the morning or the evening. If you had a bad day at work, you can kind of unwind.
Yeah, I've been up and down the James a bunch since I grew up in the Richmond area, and you guys have an unbelievable shoreline, for lack of a better term.
We got lucky.
Yeah, well, better be lucky than good, I guess. All right, so you have roots in Virginia, but you grew up in Philly. Is that right?
Grew up in Philadelphia, outside of New York City. I was actually born in Baltimore. I was a medical experiment at Johns Hopkins. And my parents moved to New York. Both of them were from Richmond, and then moved to Philadelphia.
Wait a minute. Explain the medical experiment thing.
I was the first post-double fallopian pregnancy in the U.S. I think the odds were 3.5 million to 1, and it happened on the first operation, but it took another 18 years before it worked again. It was basically, this would have been 1960 is when I was born. And a fallopian pregnancy is where the egg fertilizes inside the fallopian tube and begins to grow, so it blocks the tube. So back in the day, pre-lasers, they just had to get in there with a scalpel. And so my parents moved from Kentucky to Baltimore because of this one surgeon who said, I think I can make this happen. We'll see. Complicated family history. My mother was married to somebody else in the 50s. Had a son who was my half brother, got divorced. My dad was one of her childhood sweethearts, back in high school. So they got married and they decided to try to have a kid, which was me. And so basically things weren't working out. So Johns Hopkins was the place to be. And I got lucky, I guess. There was, I think we all are facing like astronomical odds to be born about who we are, at any given point. It's like a roulette wheel with millions of, particular options on it. Mine just had a few more options that were out there, but it worked out.
I mean, you're a miracle. I mean, to your point, every childbirth is a miracle, but yours, I mean, I don't know whether I'm more blown away by 3.5 million to 1 or the fact that almost 2 decades passed before it successfully happened again. That's wild.
It is. And again, it's like I haven't seen the data. My dad was a no-nonsense ex-Marine, so he didn't tend to blow things out of proportion. But coming from him, that's what happened. But so I got lucky.
But
again, we are lucky. So.
Yeah, we all are lucky in that regard. So what was it like being in a Marine's house growing up?
He was actually in the Marines during World War II, right at the end of it as a young guy. And so by the time I came along, 1960, that was like water under the bridge. It was, let's call it the Marine mentality. There was more stuff going on, but he was a no nonsense kind of individual. If you can picture like 1960s and 1970s, like the shortest hair anybody had would be like around the earlobe. I had a buzz cut. And I also had the curse of having relatives, if you know Richmond, who went to collegiate. So I had 2 cousins who were 2 years older than I was. And so they would send hand-me-downs up to me. So I was going to a Philadelphia public school wearing mattress pad pants and like pink Izod shirts. So fortunately, I was one of the bigger kids in class, or it would have been worse. But I learned I had a stash of like jeans and regular T-shirts like under some bushes on the way to the bus stop. So I leave a couple minutes early so I could duck into the bushes, change, go to school, come back, change into my clown outfit, go back home. Character building, they called it back then. Character building,
I guess. There was at some point in the 80s, they created a preppy handbook or something like that. And I swear it was like all the kids that went to collegiate or say Christopher's, that's how they all dress. I think the book was patterned.
This was my family. They made the book after, no, seriously. It's like everybody, you had to have a black lab, or a golden retriever. You drove a Range Rover. You wore Izod. I mean, literally, it was the handbook to my life. So it was an interesting kind of thing. So I was always one of these people, kind of love my cousins, love my relatives, but we were not of the same ilk. We're different tribes.
Yeah, when I think of Philly, I think of white T-shirts, blue jeans, rough and tumble kind of thing. I'm not thinking pink Izod shirts. No,
that was a different thing. Yeah. The madras plaid pants with do you remember these things? They were like, it looked like a quilt, basically, of different colors.
Yeah.
That did not draw any attention in Philadelphia at all. That was never made me a target for anything. It was a wonderful experience to go through.
Oh man. I guess it made you tougher.
It did.
Did you grow up in the city or were you in the outskirts?
I was on the outskirts. I was about 11 miles out of the city. So it was a area, the mailing address was Wayne, which is actually the really Tony part of Philadelphia. But it also, I went to King of Prussia High School. So you had a kind of a crazy mix, very large high school, crazy mix of GE had their engineering research facility nearby. So you always lost at science fair because all the kids with the engineer dads would create whatever this, you have this little glob of something that's supposed to be the moon. Meanwhile, they'd have this working solar flare with real flares coming off kind of thing going on. But you also had like Conshohocken, which is a very blue collar area. And you had a mix Also, I had an unusual high school. Upper Marion had a real emphasis on tech. Wasn't so much computer tech at the time, but let's say you wanted to be run a body shop or something like that, or work at a restaurant or whatnot. By the time you went through at 16, you could graduate, have a certificate, and it would let you start working at a body shop, a factory, or whatever else. So it gave you, I thought it was just the way things work, but it gave you a really interesting mix of guys, girls. Sorry, guys, y'all is a Richmond thing. Guys is the Philadelphia equivalent.
Yeah.
So the guys, including the females, would have an opportunity to basically start, making money immediately. Like I had a buddy of mine that by the time I got out of high school, he had a brand new Camaro he had paid cash for based on the jobs he was working already. So,
yeah, it's pretty practical, right? Because there are a lot of kids that aren't meant for college or even beyond that. And so, yeah, let them get into the trades, and doing it before they turn 18 or 19 is.
Yeah, I'd like to see more of it, because it's like, and I'm one of these guys too. I barely made it through high school. I blossomed when I got to college, but that surprised everybody, including myself. But particularly though, I think if you've got a tech mindset, or it's like, just even think about it. Let's say your idea is I want to start a food cart, and you're 12, 13, 14, whatever else. They could train you on business. I mean, that was part of it too. You took business classes, you took accounting classes, and it just narrowed down the focus. You could really go, okay, if this is really what you want to do, this is what you need to know. And I think the educational system, I don't think Virginia has ever quite been there. And I think the Pennsylvania school system, which used to be awesome, no disregard to it now, but I don't think it quite has the focus it did. It just basically, it really did give you the tools. Now, the problem was, as a kid, you had to figure out what those tools were pretty early, like what you wanted to do. But if you want to get serious about opening your own business by the time you're 16, 18, 20, they gave you the tools for it.
Yeah, it's a practical education. It's thinking student first. And yeah, I don't think Virginia public schools have ever had that orientation, or if they said they did, they didn't really live it. Not to speak of what it's like now, because I don't have, I have some experience through my daughter, but yeah, I mean, what you just described is, I think, how it should have been for centuries for young people.
Yeah, really, because we all have different skill sets, we all have different wants, and they change all the time too, but basically I think giving somebody an option to really follow what they're passionate about at an early ation makes a whole lot of sense. I was fortunate from a standpoint I started started undergrad in 78, got out in 82. And during that period, even if you had a liberal arts degree, that college degree would help you, would move you forward. Nowadays, if you have a liberal arts degree, it's kind of like, it doesn't really open the doors. And it really begs the question, is it really worth it? And you listen to a lot of people who sort of have a liberal arts kind of mindset, and really what I think a lot of them were looking for is like, really what I want to do is have my Etsy shop, and I want it to work really well, or I want to, start a bakery or whatever else. And those are solid skills. I mean, it takes, anybody in business, particularly if you're self-employed, it's not an easy thing to do. And so the more I think the schools could help people have that crash course in, here's what you really need to know if this is what you want to do, good and bad, I think it would be helpful. So,
yeah, and look, there's a lot of self-education that happens these days that you and I couldn't fathom when we were kids. I mean, I can Google almost anything, and you have to be careful because not everything's perfectly accurate. But if you want to fix something around the house, there's 17 YouTube videos for that one thing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, if you want to be an electrician or a firefighter, yeah, go learn those things as soon as you figure out that that's what you want to do. And you can learn by talking to your peers. You can learn by the internet, and school at some level helps. But yeah, all right. So not much of a student in high school, it sounds like. Nothing really sparked.
No, I had to kind of fight through. Also, Philadelphia, I remember sitting down And particularly my mom died when I was 5. So my dad was the primary parent till he remarried. And Philadelphia would sum it up. Basically, you'd sit down and like, your kid's kind of dumb. And it's like,
They would say that?
oh, yeah, kid's kind of dumb. I think I got called stupid more than once.
By adults?
Oh, yeah. Seriously, I'm not exaggerating at all. This was kind of it was sort of a direct, I got to talk to 30 kids in the class. I got to talk to everybody. Let's get down to brass tacks. Your kid's kind of stupid. And so, but and I grew up in a household where my dad was one of these guys. He had to be top dog all the time. So even if you did I remember I was really proud one time I got whatever the amount was, let's say 5 A's and 1 B, which by far was the best report card I had by a long shot. And the first thing out of his mouth is, why'd you mess this up? He didn't say mess it up, but why'd you mess it up and get the B? And it was sort of like, he was just that kind of guy, So I was not completely surprised to be considered, how do they describe it? Creative, but not that bright was the phrase.
Yeah. I think maybe you and I share a dad. I would have thought we would have figured that out by now, but
no, it might be out there. It's funny the amount of friends I've talked to who are like, "Are you sure we're not related?"
No, it would whether it was grades or sports, my dad would gravitate to the one thing or maybe the couple of things that weren't perfect, and that's where he focused. And I can't remember having fun in a lot of those conversations. I can't imagine you did either.
Nah, he was like okay when my mom was still around, but basically he was a absolutely check all the boxes narcissist, not like narcissistic tendencies. And I do think people throw it around a little bit too loosely, but he was one of those guys that was just basically, I was competition for him. And starting at 5, I was competition for him, so, and you're kind of up against as mentioned, I think it was a 6'3" ex-Marine. I wasn't a whole lot of competition, but that's how we played the game, moving along. But you learn things different ways. It's like I had a friend of mine who said, "Hey, if you had the choice, if we're out there before we become people, and you were given the choice, would you rather have a great father or be a great father? Which one would you pick?"
Ooh.
Yeah. And it was a good way to put things in perspective. And it was like, well, I'd like to be a great father. It'd be nice to have one, but I'd like to be one. And she was like, well, that's what happens. That's where you go. So, he and I are polar, he's long gone, but we were polar opposites. But I literally, with my kids, I'd get a lot of input from people like, wow, you're a really good father. What do you do? And I'm like, I take what my dad would do and I do the exact opposite. And they'd be like you. They'd be like you. They're like, ha, 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 ha. I'm like, no, I'm dead serious. I'm absolutely dead serious. I use him as a kind of a roadmap for what not to do.
No, I mean, look, were you a fan of Seinfeld?
Oh, heck yeah.
Sure. Yeah. When Costanza just did the opposite of whatever his instincts were and everything worked out beautifully.
Everything worked out.
How many kids do you have since you brought up being a dad?
I've got 3.
Okay. How old are they?
24, 26, and 28.
Okay. Nice. We'll close the conversation by talking a little bit more about your kids. Because you're a good dad. I imagine you love to talk about them. So did you have interest in when you were in high school? Anything really float your boat?
Sure. Actually, probably it's why I wasn't that good of a student is I really enjoyed so much other stuff, whether it was history or geology or I'd hunt a little bit, although that was really more, I love being outside. So just any excuse to be outside, to camp, to fish, to kayak, to, do whatever for the most part. And a lot of my interest was one of the great things about Philadelphia Public School, as big as it was and as interesting it was to navigate at times, is they had a closed circuit TV station. So literally when we had our morning announcements, there would be cameras and we'd have, students who were basically the anchor people. You'd have people going out with a camera to take shots of the sporting events and things like that. So I enjoyed doing comedy skits or like fake commercials or things like that. And probably in high school, that was one of the things I enjoyed the most. Like, this really dates me, but the bicentennial, particularly in Philadelphia area, was a really big deal. And so they would have, for the bicentennials, they'd have 200 years ago today for about a year leading up to the bicentennial. And, on 200 years ago today, John Adams scratched his bottom and discovered that the Constitution would be better. They talk of different things. So some friends and I put together 200,000 years ago today, sort of as a spoof on that. And we had Trog, who was a 200,000-year-old guy doing various things, like Trog discovers fire, women, whatever, essentially. And so that was something that kind of stuck through me. I've had kind of an interesting career. And like right now, decades later, I'm officially the executive producer of a TV program, which has not been picked up yet. It's still being shopped around, essentially, based on some murders that took place in my high school at the same time I was there.
Oh, wow. Can you say more about those murders? This sounds fascinating. Or about the show you're producing?
Quick way, if you're looking it up, if you Google the mainline murders, this takes place back in 1978. And I even though I've been talking about this for the past couple of years and have pitched it originally and everything else, I do a really terrible job of doing a really concise job of this. But my high school principal was seen. They didn't know he was the principal at the time, but two people are out in front of a theater, see a guy sneaking up on a van with two guns in his hands and a sort of a mask on his face. It turned out to be like a windbreaker pulled out over his head. They called the cops, again, pre cell phone. So they were lucky there was a payphone nearby. Call the cops, they pull him over. Turns out to be my high school principal. They check his house out. First of all, it's furnished with all the furniture that should have gone to the faculty lounge in the high school. It's got porn, 3 pounds of dope, satanic robes, bestiality porn, you name it, just crazy ass stuff that was, boom. And again, this is a jowly looking middle-aged guy who was also I think he was a colonel in the National Guard. But what was most interesting, they found a Brink security outfit hanging up. And somebody had been robbing the Sears stores by showing up 3 minutes before the armored car guys. They would walk in the outfit, take the cash, disappear. 3 minutes later, the actual armored car guy would show up. So they took his mugshot, showed it to the people. This was happening at Sears. And again, this is back, and this would be 1978. So cash was king. There was less of the credit cards charges going on. So they showed him to the Sears people that he robbed, and like, yeah, that's the guy. So then a year later, an English teacher of mine is found naked, dead, bound in the trunk of her car near Hershey Park. With some research, they discovered that my other English teacher, who wrote my letters of recommendation for college, by the way, was the recipient of $1 million life insurance policy. And as it turned out, the principal and my English teacher, William Bradfield, basically came up with a plan where Bradfield's like, I'll split some of the money with you if you'll kill her. And then I'll testify that you were actually at the beach with me and there's no way you could have robbed the Sears store. And the plan just fell apart. Both of them ended up getting convicted, being in jail. But neither one of them actually ever confessed to anything. So Bradfield died in prison. J.C. Smith was the principal. He was let out on a technicality. And that is really the really short version of the story. There's a lot of crazy other side things that are going along with that one. But it made a lot of news back in the 80s and when it was happening in the 70s. There are a few true crime elements, like there are a few people who like slipped on the radar that we know who they are. There's a photograph of Bradfield's, when Bradfield died, had a heart attack in prison, and they cleared out his cell. They found a Polaroid shot. And one important thing I forgot to mention is Reinhardt, who was murdered, her children also disappeared at the same time, her young children. And they've never been found. And so that this photograph, which is kind of creepy looking, it almost looks like a stone monk, but it's basically just a natural formation. Some of the speculation is that that is an indication of where the bodies were buried for the children. And Bradfield was keeping it as sort of in his back pocket. So at any rate, that was not the shortest description I could give you, but basically if you take that and you add about 15 different, like this involves the affair Bradfield had with another friend of mine and everything else, it was like an unbelievably crazy confluence of things that were happening at Upper Merion at the time.
How many kids did you graduate with?
I think my class was about 540 people.
So in the high school, you've got over 2,100 kids.
Yeah, a lot of people. Yeah. So
and that principal had all that wackiness going on in his life.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now we knew he was a little wacky, but nobody had the slightest clue he was this like satanic, just like completely, nuts out there. So,
how long have you been shopping it?
Well, where we are right now is about like 3 years ago, I pitched the story idea to a showrunner who was a friend of mine. And I think the response I got was, thanks. Maybe there was another 2 words in there, but the text was basically, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to hear anything. So about a year ago, which was 2 years later, I got a call out of the blue just saying, hey, yeah, I actually pitched the idea to a production company they'd like to talk to, or initially it was like, they're interested, I'll keep you posted. Then I got pulled in, and my backing up on this one too. I always thought, when you're watching something on Netflix and the show is over and there's like 5 minutes of this streaming of just names going by, then the Russian names and the Chinese names and the whole 9 yards. The only thing I thought this was going to happen is that I thought it'd be fun to be like story idea by, and you'd be one of these guys that was just blitzing along. But at any rate, because I was also part of what happened and had been friends with a lot of people who were involved and knew the high school teachers, knew the principal, the production company pulled me in to see if I could get involved with like talking to other students and put the information forward. So then when they decided, and the way it works is a production company or is the group, like Netflix, as an example, won't just go, hey, I want to make a show. Usually, sometimes they do, but more or less you have these production companies out there, they'll come up with ideas and they'll pitch them. They're like, hey, Netflix, are you interested? Amazon, are you interested? Peacock, are you interested? And they'll sort of go down the line. So the streaming services are used to people going, knock, knock, hey, I got an idea. So at any rate, the production company was then like, okay, well, we'd actually like to have you involved, and can we get a contract? And literally, this was just one of these things because I figured, like, what have I got to lose? So I'm like, sure, I'll be happy to do it, provided I'm an executive producer. And I have no experience in this whatsoever. I did a couple of reality TV shows about 20 years ago, just enough to kind of know how stuff works, but that's it, And it's like you're bluffing, like playing poker, and you got no hand whatsoever. Because what are you going to do? It's like, okay, come on. And so like 3 days later, they're like, okay. And it really does. It's more or less like an honorary title because these are the guys who really know what they're doing. And so I'll pitch what I think is a good idea, a good approach. But the bottom line is, they're going to come back and say, okay, this is what we really need. This is what we're looking for. Where we are right now is Netflix was a hard pass because they're looking for, right now they're working with stories where the murderer is a household name. Mm-hmm. So it's a Bundy, it's a Dahmer, things like that. As of a week and a half ago, Amazon is the most interested at this point for everything that's going on. But again, they've said that apparently for 3-4 weeks running. So I'm just kind of sitting in the dark waiting to see things happen. But it's like before, there was 2 years of absolutely nothing. Then there was a couple of months we put together what's called a sizzle reel, which is, think of it as an advertisement for the pilot. So you pull people together, it's a documentary. So we interviewed students, interviewed the prosecutors at the time. So that gets floated out with the production company. You just have to sit and wait. So it could be next week. It could be a couple months from now. It could be a hard no. You just never know.
Yeah, it's as a consumer, I think I'm tired of the Bundys and O.J. Simpsons and Gacy's of the world. I want to hear interesting stories that nobody's talked about. And what you just described is crazy and fascinating all at the same time. I think it'd be a great show. I think people, I'm sure a lot of people are humoring me, but it really is one of these things where it was picked apart in the late 70s, early 80s. Total different approach, total different mindset than looking at it now. There are definitely some true crime aspects that I think there's some gaps in the story that could get filled in with some sleuths out there taking a look. But I think the main thing, though, is with anything like this, if you've got an interesting idea, and you probably deal with this all the time, you deal with interesting people, you do your podcast all the time, yep. That, it's just because you don't have a background in production, let's say, shouldn't stop you. I used to, with my kids, I used to call the paper boulder. I'm like, look, if you're driving around a road, you're around the corner and there's this huge rock in the way and it looks like there's no way you can get forward, at least get out of the car and make sure it's not made out of paper mache. Just verify that the obstacle you got in front of you is a real one. Because I think so much of the time we make we put ourselves in this limitation box, whether it's our parents put us there, or we struck out a couple times with something we love to do. Or I think really what happens is there's so many passions you have when you're younger that kind of get snuffed out because they don't make money for you, or you feel like other people are better at it than you are or whatnot. But I think the reality of it is you just got to give stuff a shot. And the more you get out of your comfort zone, that's when the fun happens. That's when the interesting things happen. So, yeah, you said that really well. I saw somewhere the other day, the typical person will fear X number of things will happen in the future, and 85% of them never happen.
Exactly.
Like, why are you fearing all these things that are likely not to happen?
Exactly. It's like, and that can really, we're controlled by so much stuff. It's like whether it's a simple thing, you're an introvert or an extrovert, let's say, and that one, you feel kind of pigeonholed, but it's kind of fun. Like I'm right on the line, for example, between introvert and extrovert. I'm probably one notch into extrovert, but that's it, but I'm comfortable one direction or the other. And so when I was a kid, I was much more comfortable or safe in the total introvert zone where you're a little shyer, you're a little quiet, you didn't act up and stuff like that. And then I realized it really was not very much fun. It's like, it was better to, like even in Philadelphia, it's better to catch some crap for something you were saying than to just like slip through the mainstream that's out there. Yeah. So yeah, it just depends. Well, for example, okay. How did you start, Paul, asking you the question, how did you start doing your podcast? What was the motivation for you to shift into that?
Quick story. Somebody told me that I should start my own podcast. I said, that's funny. I don't know what a podcast is. And this was 2020. 6 days later, somebody independently said I should start a podcast. Their idea was me telling stories I flipped that around and said I should be talking to people about their stories because I really do enjoy these conversations. And so because of that, within the same week, 2 people independently said that. I said, let's give it a try. And I learned that I absolutely adore the chase of getting somebody on the podcast and even more adoration for the conversations themselves.
Gotcha. Which I think kind of proves my point. It's like one of these things that sometimes you need to trust that nudge, to like, you could have just as easily said, nah, I haven't done it before, or there are too many podcasts out there right now, but you were like, okay, sounds cool. Let me give it a little bit of go. So I personally think that's what life's about. Whether you wake up one day and feel like, hey, I'm going to do a podcast, or you're open to the fact that people you trust, and you didn't say if these were close friends or not. Like, best advice I've ever gotten is usually been for people I barely know.
Yeah, these are coworkers that I didn't know super well. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So either we're idiots to follow people we barely knew, or it's like we're geniuses because these are the people who can like change your life.
Well, but to your paper mache boulder point, I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you just test it? Just go down the path.
Because most people don't. And I'm not blaming them, but I'm just basically, it's kind of like, well, it goes against logic. Okay, I'm on a road. There's something in my way. Okay, I'm going to wait for somebody else to bail me out, or let me call AAA, or let me do whatever. But yeah, I think the reality of it is we got to occasionally get out of the car and size up our environment. That's basically it. What's going on, what's around us, and kind of react to that. Because I think most of us just kind of, and myself included, lots of times during parts of my life, you're just behind the wheel, AC's cranking, you got the music on you like, and you just go down the path, and I think the more you get out and check things out, the more that's where the fun stuff happens.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's funny, you say you're on the line between introvert and extrovert. I'm actually on that line too, or really close to that line, or at least the outside world has told me that a bunch. But I also have done my own reflection. The term ambivert is what I've been called, and I guess that applies to both of us. And I can be comfortable in both ends of the spectrum, and I can also be uncomfortable at times, both ends of the spectrum, just depending on, I guess, a lot of factors. All right, so you're in high school. Was the idea that you were always going to go to college?
The idea was, I figured I was looking at what I could do, wanted to make a living, didn't necessarily wanted to do I wasn't against the blue collar lifestyle, but I really was more interested in, like, a lot of the English classes I took, which really focused on like English literature, really were kind of eye-opening to me. It's the best way to describe it. Like, I really enjoyed learning about this or learning about that. So shooting for college. Again, this is another side comment. I found out years later I'm somebody they call a divergent, or have something called divergent, which is, most people think in a straight line. If you're like, hey, how do I do blank? They're like, okay, I could do that. That might not work out. And you start back and you like, okay, well, I could do this. I could try that. I could do whatever. Divergents use a flash of insight. So they'll run down 4, 5, 6 possibilities. Your brain will go, this is the right answer, and come back. And so you're a killer problem solver. But as a kid, it really gets in the way because your brain hasn't quite, it's sort of like being born with a 480 horsepower engine, but you're basically a wagon. You don't have a way to control it. So, small example, but like spelling was almost impossible because your brain would be like, oh, okay, well, there's C, but that sounds like an S, and there's I, but I could sound like an E. And so while you're trying to figure out what a word is, everybody else in class has already figured it out. It's usually 1 out of 24 people. Certain things like a mathematical table, I don't know if you had to study that back in the day. Yep. It took me weeks to memorize that. just because my brain kept on getting in the way. It's almost like it kept on trying to hand you something that wasn't what you needed at the time, so it would get in the way. So the irony is, by the time a divergent gets to college, they are so fed up with the educational system because it's not set up for them to think that way. But if you make it as far as college, they reward you for thinking in multiple ways. Like I do remember Philadelphia. This is back to the, your kid's dumb thing. Is I did get some crap one time because we're studying math. Addition. I'm guessing this is first grade, second grade. I don't know. And so they were like, well, you can take 2 from 3, but you can't take 3 from 2. So I raised my hand. I'm like, well, why not? And they were like, well, you just can't do it. I'm like, well, why couldn't you take that from that? And they could have said, these are negative numbers. You're going to study this a couple of years from now. But instead, they would literally give you crap for raising that, and again, I was a shy kid at the time. I'm not trying to raise any type of give everybody a hard time. I just would like to know. So the irony is divergents always want to know why. And that is not rewarded in grade school. Again, I barely made it through high school. When I got to college, I ended up with 3 majors, with audit classes. I was the editor for the school newspaper. I had 2 part-time jobs, and I loved it. I just had a great time because you could actually just learn the way you graduated with honors, went on to law school. But I don't think there was anybody in my family who would have thought I would have gotten to college, let alone done well when I got there. So my dad accused me of cheating when he got my first report card.
The guy that was in competition with his son.
Oh yeah. He couldn't handle. I think I had a 3.8 or a 3.9 my freshman year. So, wow. But part of it, I was lucky. But part of that, you were talking about people, acquaintances who give you the best advice. I'm at I think it was my church. They had sort of meet kids who are about age kind of thing, And so anyway, there's a guy who comes up and he goes, look, let me pass along some advice to you. A guy I never met before. He was probably a sophomore. I'm like, sure, I'm game. What's going on? He goes, all right, there are 8 semesters. And when you get to college, suddenly your parents aren't there. Beer is available. Girls are available. You're going to have a great time. That first semester, you're going to have a wonderful time. And your GPA is going to be like a 2.1. He goes, then you're going to wake up to the fact that you need to get a higher GPA to get a job. So you're going to spend 7 semesters fighting uphill to get that GPA up. And if you're lucky, it'll be up to a 2.8, about a 3.0. He goes, work your ass off the first semester, get a really high GPA, and then you coast for 7 semesters after that. And that was exactly what I needed. I'm like, okay, that sounds good to me. So I really just focused really hard on that first semester. And I did exactly that. I worked hard, but I had a lot of fun. I lost some friends from from college, because they got pissed at me because I was having a really good time and still had a really high GPA. But it's because I worked my butt off the first semester. So, again, it's this advice out of the blue sometimes, which is the best.
No, I wish I'd met that guy.
On a podcast.
Yeah. How did you learn you were divergent?
I learned it sort of complete accident, but my eldest, all 3 of my kids needed to have speech therapy, which makes sense because I remember as a kid when I was growing up, I'd have a hard time. I don't remember this. My brother would remind me, I'd say mook instead of milk, or this would be breakfast. I just had a hard time with some of them. And all 3 of my kids were the same way. So my oldest, we were at speech therapy. Actually, we were at speech therapy for my second kid. And I was living in Arlington at the time. John Hopkins was offering a study. And they're like, we were looking for a baseline kid to study kids who are autistic and with different areas. And basically they were saying, we want to put your kid in an MRI and have them play video games. And we're going to use that as a base or checking out other kids with other learning approaches. And I think it was they would give for every baseline that they would work with, they'd give $50 towards their education. And then they would do an IQ test, basically like an intelligence test. So anyway, Jackie went through this, came back, got the input on my, I think it was by email. And it was like, found out that she scored in the genius category in science and math, and then really low in the other categories. And it said something like, barring divergency, there's a little blue link. I'm like, So I clicked on that. And it was the first time I'd ever read about myself. It was I was like, holy mother of God. It was like just this description of like your thought process of what it went through. And so Hopkins was saying, which I learned later, is that you can do an IQ test, you can do an intelligence test, but divergency is its own different animal. And so that's basically how I learned about it. And
if I'm doing the math right, you were in your 40s when you learned that.
Yeah, it was. So it was very late in life. Again, I'd actually been tested, let me see, early 30s for a job, and discovered I wasn't stupid. It was between me and another guy from North Carolina for a job in Charlottesville. And they were, instead of a coin toss, they were like, well, let's send these guys out and get tested for intelligence and problem solving and everything else. And much to my shock, scored weirdly high in these areas. And the divergency, and what they didn't talk about divergency at the time, but it sort of makes sense. It's just sort of like, there are all sorts of different types of intelligence out there, but it's like an ability that's just kind of innate. It's like, that's where it is. So all three of my kids are in that same category. We all had difficulty going to school. My daughter, Nicole, particularly, I had, I think when she was in first grade, I was at her class or at her school for my middle guy for Fox. And one of the teachers is going down the hall with all the kids, sort of like little ducks, follow her along. And she recognizes me and she stops and she's like, I hope you're saving. I'm like, excuse me? She goes, I hope you're saving. We've been talking about your daughter. I'm like, okay. I had no idea what she was talking about. And she's like, she might be living with you her whole life. And at the time, Nicole was having some real reading and spelling else. And I was like, okay, Nicole Dobbins? And she's like, yes, of course. And I'm like, she's going to be a CEO of a company one day. I mean, seriously, the girl's smarter than, anybody I've known at the time. And the interesting thing is, it took her a while, but she's now a marine biologist, went to UVA, had a 3.9, processes like crazy, but she had a heck of a time, particularly through grade school, just, getting by. So,
yeah, well, so all three of your kids, so it's got to be genetic.
It is. Usually, if you are divergent, the odds are really good that your kids are going to be divergent. And I can't remember the exact number. I think it's like in a classroom setting, 1 out of 23 or 1 out of 24. So basically, one kid out of the class is going to be divergent. I looked into years ago, and if there's one thing in life I wish I could go back and do a do-over, I kind of naively was like, this would make life so much easier for people who are divergent if schools will just be educated on it, and found out it's not considered a disability. So there are some teachers who are aware of it, but let me back up a little bit. They, like Thomas Edison, Bill Gates, were all considered divergent. It's people who like I remember as a kid, I was taking like abandoned washing machines apart when I was about second, third grade. I can't say steal tools. I wasn't supposed to use them, but I'd borrow tools from my dad, run out, try to figure out what's going on. I don't remember, but my brother would talk about, I would have all these nails and wires and batteries and switches and light bulbs set up when I was probably first or second grade. And I'm like figuring out circuits. So this cuts the lights on, this turns the bell on, this does this does that. And meanwhile, I'm getting like C- and Ds in school. But the school stuff was just very kind of abstract. But I would love to see somebody who would just basically educate the educators on divergence, because divergence have no interest in teaching, not teaching per se, but most concurrent thinkers are the ones who've designed the educational program. And it doesn't really appeal to divergence. And I don't know how many times I've told this story, and there's always somebody's like, oh my God, that's me. It's like I didn't do well till I got out of the system. And the other thing too is most divergents that I know grew up thinking you were kind of stupid because you were told that. Again, nowadays would probably be somewhat kinder, but it's usually the people that you really want to be, instead of rambling on, the divergents can't help but think out of the box, that they're always thinking out of the box. And when you start out doing that at a young age, you realize nobody else is quite thinking the way you are, and you think it's your problem. You think you really don't have it together. But I don't know. It gave me a greater appreciation for the different types of intelligences that are out there. So
how might your life have changed? Not if they had met you where you needed to be met as a divergent. I'm not asking that question, but if you had learned in your early to mid 20s that's how your brain worked, do you think your life would have been different?
That's a great question. It probably wouldn't have been. I'm kind of a stubborn individual, so it's kind of like my mindset was I might be stupid, but I'm going to do this anyway and kind of plug forward. If somebody had explained to me, no, you're not stupid, this is just the way your brain thinks, that might have taken the fun out of it. It's kind of like, I like the adversary situations sometimes pull out the best of me, if I feel like I've got to go against the odds. So yeah, that actually is, I've never thought about it that way, but I kind of have, in hindsight, I kind of appreciate the fact that I was kind of doing what I was doing without knowing that I actually had essentially a bit of a superpower. And instead I thought it was a detriment, but by thinking it's a detriment, I think it gave me the strength to kind of like just be tenacious and keep on plugging on stuff. So I don't know.
It sounds like you, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but you were put through on a tougher path for sure. It would have been an easy answer, I guess, if you had learned that in your 20s.
It's one of these things I sort of look over my shoulder, and I had an interesting childhood, like we talked about a little bit. I took the funnier side of it, but my dad remarried my stepmother had borderline personality disorder and was schizophrenic, and he was a narcissist. So as a really young kid, you learn to kind of make your way through some interesting times. And I think sometimes stubbornness is viewed as a negative trait, but basically it's a good survival trait. So there was like an awareness that happened really, really early in my life that, one, life is short. I know misconceptions like your mom dies at 5 and you're kind of like, okay, that's where that can happen. So that's a gift in a way. Actually, not in a way. It's a gift from a standpoint that if you realize that you are responsible for the here and now, and you're not, as long as life would look to most 5-year-olds, essentially, to realize it's temporal is a gift. And then actually just to realize that you have to figure out how to get out of this maze you're in as a kid. I had a calendar on the backside of a poster that I started when I was, I think, about 11, which was how many days till I was out of the house kind of thing. And you would sort of focus on that. And it doesn't mean it was all bad, but there were some interesting times in there. But it was kind of the barrel. You're the bullet, that's the barrel, and this sort of put you on a straight shot. And I think long-term, I just basically learned some good survival skills that have helped me out, ever since then. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but, at the same time, you just have to live and go.
The only two, I don't even know how to describe this. The only other two experiences where I think people are counting down until it's over and you get to, you can follow a new path are people in the military who sign up for a 4-year stint and they almost immediately start counting down to the end of 4 years, or people that are in prison.
I would relate to either one. I really would. It's like, and I think that's another reason I did so well in college is it's like, it wasn't just college. It was like breathing pure air when you've been breathing kind of a polluted version of air for a long time. Like suddenly your lungs expand, you feel better, the whole 9 yards that are out there. So yeah. I would say those are the two analogies I would describe it as without going into too much detail, but yeah.
All right, good. I'm tracking all this. By the way, the divergent thing is fascinating me. I can confirm for you that I am not divergent. The education system did okay with me. I imagine there are other, not forms of divergency, but other unique brains that just don't mesh well with the concurrent system.
There's got to be, because the thing too is like, from my perspective, I mentioned like negative numbers, but like I was particularly in class, I was a pretty shy kid that wasn't trying to be a wise ass. And you would get some crap for asking what I thought would be a normal question, and again, probably, this day and age, probably less so. I think more teachers are going to be like, okay, back in the day, I think it was a little more, okay, we're covering X through Z, shut up, here's where we're going and moving forward. But it does give me some appreciation because, well, you've got people they talk about social IQ, and it's like, it's people, that just, they're able to connect with everybody. It doesn't matter if they're to the left or they're to the right, this person can, talk to them, have a good conversation. And I think that's a brilliant form of intelligence, just to be able to relate on that way. You've got people who are engineers or mathematicians or, literal rocket scientists who can, I'm awe at us as a species, as dumbass, stupid as we can be, and as brilliant we can be. It's just amazing from point A to point B. Like just realizing that Voyager, which was sent out in, 77, 78, is still beyond the solar system and functioning, and was temporarily down a couple of weeks ago. And the NASA scientists were able to, figure out what the problem is, reboot it, move things over and everything else. It's like freaking amazing, and yeah, so I think as human beings, it's like we all have our own ability to be intelligent in different areas. It's just a matter of what we do with it. Yeah. And then we got the dumbasses. They're out there. They always are, But I think the dumbasses throughout. Yeah, the real dumbasses, because I think those are the guys, Philadelphia Sense, guys and girls, not trying to exclude anybody, as who really don't try, with whatever it is, whether it's, somebody's got a great sense of humor, but they don't speak up, somebody who's got some great artistic ability, but they don't follow up with it. Somebody who is great at connecting people, could be in politics, could do some wonderful stuff, and it's just not for them, even though the talent's there. It's like you got to have I think we all have some exceptional intelligence, but we don't all have the drive to put that together. Yeah. This is an old school analogy, but I think we all have the engine, but not all of us are good at riding the clutch as well as we should be to make it work.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I grew up driving stick shift. So we're at an hour now. I'm going to have you back there because Laura said you have a lot of great stories to talk about. I do want to ask, why law school? What was the idea of going to law school? What were you going to do?
Okay. That was my 17-year-olds to blame for that. When I was about 16, 17, I was looking at what I wanted to do. I was looking for I really enjoyed, as I mentioned, English, liberal arts stuff really appealed to me. Just sort of like, what's life about? What's philosophy about? What's this, what's that? I was also smart enough to realize that's not going to pay the bills. And I didn't want to teach English necessarily. So I was just at the beginning of, I guess basically my 17-year-old narrowed down to law school, opened the most doors and closed the fewest amount of doors. But I had no interest in practicing law. I wanted to know what the rules were, what everyone was, had to go on. And when I got into law school, the door was kind of open for me that at the time, the online side was just starting up there. Or when I say side, online publishing particularly was out there, but it was mainly in the medical, legal, and porn were the three biggest areas that were there. So porn probably would have been a shorter, more direct, more profitable route, but basically I couldn't memorize, so medical was out. So I picked the law degree because I wanted to move into the online industry, basically. So, okay. And it was a good move for me. It worked out great. The law degree was so I could talk to lawyers and understand what they were doing. It was sort of like flashing a fraternity sign or something like that. They really didn't care what you knew, but they were just more comfortable if they knew you were another lawyer for the most part. So the law degree just
part of their tribe. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. It was just to be tribal. Yeah. So 3 years of hell just to be able to get, knock on the door and they'd actually talk to you. But the online part was great though. That was a lot of fun. That was when I was sort of like all the pistons were firing back to the car analogies.
Well, what exactly were you doing online?
I ended up, even though this had nothing to do with my background, I would do startups and turnarounds for companies. So I'd work for large companies that thought they should get into the online industry, but this was back in the day when nobody really knew what that meant or how exactly it was going to work. So my first company was working with a group called Westlaw, which is the largest legal publisher at the time, but they were a teeny tiny startup on the online industry section. And so I would basically try to come up with a way I always viewed myself as a translator. I would try to get law firms that were used to just using books to sort of transition over to the online side. And from their perspective, it was like being in a 1982 Honda and then suddenly having to jump in a Ferrari. Yeah, it was almost too much power. I can't do this. I don't need this and everything else. So I'd have to try to get them to look at what they do now, translate it, break it down into manageable parts. And what I was good at is I could point out the parts of their work that just sucked and then show them, okay, this is just a teeny, teeny, tiny part of what we could do electronically. But given a quick example, reading through a case law book back in the day, you have code and you have case law. That's how legal works. Code is where the legislators are like, you can do this, you can't do that. Case law is where somebody's like, yeah, but does this really mean that it's commercial if you do this? And that's when it's basically examples are set. And so if you have lawyers arguing a point, they're going to reference other cases. So you read through a case, there's probably, let's say, a dozen cases in there. Well, back in the day, you're literally going through the library, you run across this case, you have to get up, walk around, find that case, pull it out, put that book in front of you, flip it open, find the case, read through the whole case, all 40 pages to see if it applies or not. And then a couple minutes later, here's another reference, and then here's another reference. So just showing a lawyer back in the day that, linking, hypertext linking, wow, it was like magic to them, where it's like, okay, you reference Jones v. Smith, click. This takes you right over immediately while you can think about it. You scan through, this doesn't apply to me. You go right back, you keep on reading. I'd have senior partners throwing their younger associates away from the table to get up and take a look because it's something they could relate to. So what I would do basically is just take complicated things, make them simple, and make them interesting. Make them so like, hey, this is something you can do. And so I ended up working for Fortune 500 companies, even though I had absolutely no business background whatsoever. And when I say that, I'm not like, haha, I'm like, never took a marketing class, never took a business class, never took an accounting class. I was always the guy in the room that everybody else is reading through spreadsheets and everybody's on page 32. And I'm on page 1 going, okay, column A, what does this mean? Cross references to, but I was fortunate, maybe it's the divergency thing, but common sense usually won out, where everybody else is trying to think with numbers and you're just basically trying to focus on, is what's making the customer happy, what's getting in the way, how do you keep the sales force happy, that kind of stuff. So anyway, that was my indirect way to law school. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to people to do it, but it worked for me.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Hey, so let's end this particular discussion with telling us a little bit more about your kids.
I've got 3 kids, 2 girls and a guy. Oldest and youngest are girls. I have one, Jackie, who is teaching physics at Richmond Public School. I've got Fox, he's working for JetBlue. On the excuse me, the Bezos's space program. He is one of these guys that can fabricate anything out of nothing. Like as a kid, one time his phone broke and I'm thinking, okay, it's going to be a while before we're going to be able to fix it. And he took it apart, fabricated a replacement part out of, I think it was a ballpoint pen piece or something, put it back together, and it worked for the remaining part of the his ownership of the
that's
ownership
wild.
of it.
That's so wild to me.
It's crazy. Well, he would be one of these guys he'd mention like chainmail, like Middle Ages, medieval stuff. And did I know anything about it? I'm like, no. And then a week later, he would come downstairs and he had fabricated an entire glove out of chainmail and had figured out how to bend the metal a certain way and do this or do that. So he's just extremely handy. And then my youngest is Nicole, and she's a marine biologist. So she is up near Seattle right now. Last I communicated with her yesterday, she was floating through a river doing a count for salmon eggs, so all 3 interesting kids.
And all 3 doing things that are intellectually really tough, it sounds like.
Yeah. It's I can't say I'm going to take credit for it, but at the same time, I guess the best way to describe it is, so I lived in Arlington for a number of years before I came back to Richmond, and they had a preschool that was, you'd pay for it, but it was subsidized by Arlington County. And I'm picking one of my kids up one time. It was actually Nicole. And the teacher comes up to me and she said very, very kind of bluntly and directly, she goes, you're teaching your kids to be free thinkers. And I'm like, I am. And she goes, uh-huh. And I'm like, is that a bad thing? And she goes, no, but it's not what most people do. And God bless her, this was Miss Rebecca, and she was a savant with my kids. If she was like, this kid needs help on this, man, she was right. She just would nail it down. But she basically gave me something to think about, which I hadn't thought of. I really hadn't thought about it. But my take was, you ought to think for yourself, which apparently is a little heresy out there. But I tried to pass that along to my kids. And I think as a result, all of them approach life like they could do whatever they really thought they could do, if that makes sense. They're obviously, pre-wired. I thought I was going to be the worst parent on the block because my brother was 9 years older than I was, had no babysitting experience, had no child rearing experience whatsoever. And I was naive to the standpoint. I thought when you got a kid, you got a blank canvas. Like they go, here you go. Here's the canvas. Here's the paint. Here's the brushes. And I was like terrified that you're going to basically, like, the brush should be a little bit to the left or the right. You screwed it up and you screwed their life up for the rest of their life and everything else. And of course you have kids, and in a very short period of time, we realize they are so hardwired to be themselves. That's it. So I feel like my only job with my kids was to sort of tap them a little bit, keep them on a path that looked like it makes sense for them for the most part. But, and I apologize if it was long. Yes, they all enjoy thinking, like, whatever that entails, what they enjoy kind of tackling stuff that's out there. And I'd say all three of them don't particularly care what somebody else is doing.
Yeah.
Or how it impacts them.
They're probably enjoying life a lot more than the average bear, I'm guessing.
I would say yes. At least I hope so. So far, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, Blair, I'm very glad I met you and Laura. You guys are getting married soon, right?
Yeah. Coming up next month, end of next month, June 30th.
Yeah. And you're getting married at your beautiful property, which is couldn't ask for a better place to get married, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, good luck with everything over the next month or so, maybe 5 weeks getting ready. And I really appreciate you doing this, Blair.
Hey, appreciate it. Thanks, Paul. Great to check. Excuse me. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Great to have an opportunity to touch base with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.